Hi and welcome to my second video dealing with Unity's new UI toolkit. In this video we're going to start by adding some variables that can be used across your USS style sheets and also set up a second UXML document which will be used by our settings menu. In the last video we set up this start screen with a start button to take you into the main game, a settings button which we will be filling out in more detail in this video, and a quit button to close your program down. These are all styled and controllable and clickable. If you'd like to get to a similar state, please check out my first video on the subject where I detail how I set this all up. So in my last video I started to build a style around my buttons and text, and I did this directly on those buttons, and if you recall I created some styles which, if I go into open the UI toolkit, as you can see we added these styles using classes in this section here to style each of these assets. Now for smaller projects this is probably all you will actually need, given you probably are going to have a relatively small number of classes and moving variables around is probably not going to be a big deal. However, as you start setting up larger projects, or if you want to be able to switch the styling, the colors and the stylings of your UI on the fly or while your program is running, then you want to try and separate some of your concerns away. And one of the ways we can do this is set up another USS style sheet which can hold all of the colors and any other variables that you might want to use within your styling for your projects. This is everything from colors to images, borders, anything that you can, the sizes, I believe also the alignments, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But definitely margins, padding, corner radius, all of these sorts of things can be set up as variables. We're going to go to our project window, down into UI Toolkit and Styles, and I'm going to create a new UI Toolkit style sheet, and this one I'm going to call Dark Purple Theme. Open that up in our code editor, which I'm going to skip to when this actually opens up properly. Is that all sorted? Yep, good. Right. Now in here, as you can see, we've already got a visual element created. We're going to remove this and instead type in root. This is where we're going to add these variables. Now you can add these anywhere within your USS files at any point that you want, but by putting it into the root we're going to have it available to everything across the board. So I'm just going to expand these brackets out. Okay, so adding a variable in here is very simple. So you need to make sure that you precede it with 2 dashes, whatever variable you're going to use. So the first variable I'm going to use is highlight.mid, then a colon, a spacebar, and then I'm going to add my color as a hex value, which is going to be 463475. And that's it. Now I have a variable that can be used anywhere within my USS files. That's all the colors that I'm going to use for now. These are all taken from the styles that I created in the last video. So if you'd like to see how I got those values, please see that video. Do make sure that you have got these double dash at the beginning. This is a requirement for these variables. Now, to actually use them, unfortunately at the moment, the UI builder within Unity itself doesn't currently support you adding or editing these values directly, so you have to do it within the USS documents themselves in your code editor. So now to actually add them into the styles that we already have, I'm now going to open up start with the button theme, which I'm going to open. There we go. And now in the button theme, all I need to do is go and replace all of the values with the correct corresponding colors. So we'll start at the top, and to replace one of these, it's very simple. You're going to type the var keyword, put in some brackets, remembering your double dash, and now you're just going to add in the name of the variable that you had. Oh, mid. It's as simple as that. So color is the text. So I believe this should be var, and this is going to be gray dot 1. No, gray dot 2, I think. Simple as that. So I'm going to go down through all of these and fill them all out. And now there's one last thing that we need to do, because if you go back to your style now, you'll see that if you go back to the Unity editor now, you'll see that everything will have disappeared. But we need to make one more change so that all of our colors will come back. And that is to open up the main UXML document, which we'll do now. Start recording. Okay, as you can see, I've now got it up and working. Yes, one slight change that you need to make from what I said earlier is if we go back to the code, you can see it's a colon root rather than just root. So that change, and that makes it the top level. So these are now available for your other USS documents to take advantage of. Okay, and the last thing to do before the settings is we're now going to update the theme file. So if I go back to the Unity editor, and from here, if I go back to the UI Toolkit, go into Unity theme and Unity default theme, which if we go to the UI document first, and go to the panel settings, we should see the Unity default runtime theme. This is the one that we're still using. If we select this, you can see that we're able to add a list of style sheets. So to this, I'm just going to add, if I just lock this in place, I'm going to add the style sheets that we've already created. So that's going to be the dark purple theme, the tutorial buttons styles, and the tutorial labels, and then hit apply. Now what this means is if we go back to the builder, we can now actually remove all of these USS files. And as you can see, all of our styling has remained in place. Why is it done? And as you can see, all of our styling has remained in place. This is because we're being controlled by the Unity default theme. If you remember from the last video, we can select this and change it to say the edited dark theme, and it will go back to that theming. But then we can go back to our Unity default runtime theme, and we've got this back. So that's a useful way to be able to keep your styling between different sheets without having to completely populate this style sheets with every USS file that you've already created. One thing to keep in mind when doing this is that the style that is closest to the element is the one that the element will use. So the theme file is the furthest away from the element that it's possible to get. So any other styling that you add in place will override that theme file. So if I put a new class in here that has the same name as, for example, .unity button or .button main title, and change the styling there, that's the one that button is going to that styling is going to be used instead of the one from the theme file. And equally, if I select the button and start modifying the settings directly in here, then that is what is going to be used instead. So always remember that the closer to the element that you are, the more likely that style is what's going to be used. One other thing to note is, as you can see here in the text color, it's got the color in there that we're using, and it's got this sort of gray highlight going around the variable. This is just telling you that it's using a style variable rather than being controlled directly. And like I said earlier, currently these aren't controllable from the UI builder. This just gives you an indication that this variable is being controlled. Okay, so now it's time to create the settings view. So for this, I'm going to create 2 new UXML documents. So going to Project, UI Toolkit, Panels, I'm going to create UI Toolkit, UI Document, and this is going to be called Tutorial Settings View. And another one, create UI Toolkit, UI Document. And this is going to be called Start View. The reason that I'm creating 2 UXML documents here is because I need somewhere to keep everything together. And that's what the Start View is going to do. So the Start View is going to hold a copy of the tutorial main menu and the tutorial settings menu. And so I'm going to replace the tutorial main menu on the UI document in the scene with that Start View. So if I open up Start View, as you can see, very basic setup again. I'm going to click the top of the hierarchy, match the game view, zoom out so that it's the right size. And for this, I'm just going to leave blank. Now, if I go to the library on the left-hand side and open Project, this is where we're going to be able to add the documents that we already have. So I can open Assets, UI Toolkit, Panels, and it will show me the panels that I already have available. So the first one I'm going to add by double-clicking is the tutorial main menu. And then I'm going to double-click again and add the tutorial settings view as well. So for both of these, what I can do is select this. Yeah, I want to select both of these and select Grow, making sure that they fill the entire area. The same for the settings view. As you can see, that's going to start taking up which part of the screen, which we don't want to happen. So as the default, we want to go to Display for the tutorial settings view and set the display to be turned off. We will then, in the code later on, swap which one is displayed and which one isn't. Okay, so the next thing to do is to open the tutorial settings view that we created earlier. So one way to do this is to right click in the hierarchy here and select Open in UI Builder. Don't just double click on this because it will just try to rename it. Make sure it's right click, Open in UI Builder. Save those. Also, again, be careful double clicking in here because that will just add that UXML document to your hierarchy. If you want to select it from here, you can right click and again open in UI Builder. Okay, to start off with, I'm going to go back to the standard controls and add a visual element. This I'm just going to grow to fill the entire screen, and I'm going to set the background color just to something. We'll just make it a grey for a moment. I am going to add that to its own USS, which I will then use later on. But I always like to set the colors in here first in any other variables, even if I'm going to use a variable that I've already set up in the root, just because then it populates the UXML document for me, and all I have to do is copy and paste the variables without having to worry about all the names, the USS names that I need to use. So later on, I will probably add or create a list view in here so that you would be able to scroll through all of the settings that you have. But for now, I'm not going to worry about that. So what I need to add next is a title. This is just going to say settings. And I'm going to give this a name, title. Next, I need to add a button. And to this, I'm going to make this the back button, which we'll call back. No, I'm going to call it back button. It's going to make it easier to search for later. And then I need to add two more things. So for the settings screen, for this tutorial, we're going to add a toggle to turn full screen on or off, and also to be able to select the resolution that you want your game to display at. So for those two things, we're going to add a toggle, and we'll call this full screen toggle. And we're going to add a, what is it? Oh, and then we're going to add a drop down. And this is going to be resolution select. Oh, actually, resolution drop down. And we'll just name it resolution. So as you can see, this currently doesn't look like anything particularly special. And it's just using the default styling again. This is very easy to fix. So the first thing we're going to do is select our button here, and we're going to add to it button main title. As you can see, that has automatically styled our button to look like the ones that we've got in our main title screen. And we can go to our settings, and again, we're going to call this label. We're going to add the class, we're going to add the class label main title. So now at least it's starting to look like what we're already used to. So the next thing I'm going to need to do is I want to style my toggle and my drop down box, and also the background, because that currently isn't set up in a style sheet. So I'm going to create 3 new style sheets. The first one in UI Toolkit styles, and I'm going to call this background ground create another one. This one called toggle. Tutorial toggle. Toggles. Wait, what? I'm going to remove this. I'm going to add a new style, which I'm going to call tutorial drop downs. And one more called tutorial backgrounds. So now I'm going to go and create all the styles for the background, give them all of their color variables, and I'm also going to style these elements. Please be aware, for some of the more complex elements, for the more complex controls that you can add from the library, you need to actually override the Unity styles before they'll actually affect what you need to show, because you don't have direct access to everything underneath. As you can see, these are grayed out. I'm just going to go and put those styles in and get it set up. I'll give you a quick walkthrough, but if you would like to see a more detailed video on how to edit each individual control that's in here and to get full control over your styling, then do let me know down in the comments. Now you can see that I've fully styled the settings menu for now. So the next stage is to start adding the code that will populate your resolution dropdown and allow you to toggle between full screen and not. So the first thing to do is to go back and make sure that we have a make sure we have a script file for each of our UXML files. So I'm going to go back to the main Unity editor and go to our panels. As you can see, we've only got the one for the main menu presenter, so we'll just create two more. It should be Start View Presenter. And Tutorial Settings View Presenter. Okay, so now we're in the Start View Presenter. We want to grab the main root element of the Start View Presenter and then swap between the main Start menu and the Settings menu. So to start with, we'll grab our root visual element as we did before. And now with this, we can then query the two visual elements that we added to that main script, which if we go back to Unity, we can see that these are just the main names themselves. So we'll start by grabbing that. I'm going to create two private variables to hold these elements. And as you can see, I've got these the wrong way round. So we will set this to settings and this to start. Okay, now that we have our two elements, we're now going to start actually adding some useful functionality to our buttons. So we'll start by adding the settings button to take us to that settings menu. First thing we're going to do is grab our main menu presenter. And make this equal to a new tutorial menu presenter. And then from inside there, we're going to assume an action within it, which we will call open settings. and this is going to equal a new action, which we can define with a lambda expression. And within here, we can do the start view, and then what we can call is dot display, and set this to false, and settings view dot display to true. Now, this display function is an extension that I've written, and I'll just show you that now. It's very simple. It's just trying to skip past having to write so much code each time. So all it is a very simple extension method. If you'd like me to go over how extension methods work, then please leave a comment below. But we're just getting a visual element, whichever visual element we want, taking in a boolean of whether it should be enabled or disabled. We make sure that the element isn't null, and then you can call element.style.display. So .style, this is how you would manipulate the styling of your element from code. And then from there we can just call the display method, and then depending on whether it's enabled or not, we call display style of flex or display style of none. Now we can just use IntelliSense to create for us a property, which will be an action ready for us to populate. So now that is set up. And we'll just do the same thing for the settings menu as well. Okay, now that's all set up. Just one last thing to do here, which is just to extract all of these methods just to make your code a bit neater, and it'll just help later on when you're trying to debug what's going on. So I'll just do that now. Okay, and as you can see, I have split out the start menu and the settings menu into their own functions, and also created a function just for toggling between the two menus. This should tidy it up for later, and when we want to add more functionality to each of these menus, they can be added in later on. Next is to actually add the functionality for open settings and back action. So to do that, we'll start by going into the main menu presenter. Next, we're going to, hang on. Before I do that, I'm going to go back to Unity, and in here, I'm going to remove the tutorial main menu presenter from here. And instead, I'm going to add the start view presenter, and I'm going to add the start view to the source assets. Now back to the code. In here, I'm going to go into the tutorial main menu presenter. I'm going to start by removing the mono behavior so that we can actually use that new keyword. And now I need to refactor this a little bit because we are no longer using it as a mono behavior. We need to create a constructor which is going to pass through the appropriate root elements that we want for this menu. Now that we've done that, I'm going to assign our settings button to its own visual element, to its own button variable. Now that I've done this, in the open settings action, I can create a new set which will just lambda into the settings button dot clicked plus equals the value. This will allow you to add functionality to that settings button from outside of this menu. Now I'm just going to replace the start and quit buttons with in a similar fashion, and then just refactor this script a little bit. Okay, as you can see, I've now got a variable for each of the buttons that we have, and adding the logs in a separate function. Now if we go back to our start view presenter, we'll see that there is an error because we're not passing through the root visual element that we're expecting. So we can add that very easily by underscore and start view. And now we'll do the same for the tutorial settings view presenter. So we can start by sending in our variable for the constructor of settings view. And now inside of this, we can remove the mono behavior, add a constructor, and make sure that our back action is assigned to the back button. There we are. For now, that's all we need. So now if we go back to Unity and we run our scene, if we click on the settings button, we can see we've still got the debug and we've gone to the settings view, and if we hit back, we've gone back to the settings view. I can see that I have got some issues with the styling, so I'll try and get that fixed for the next video. Almost certainly I've assigned the wrong colours to the wrong classes. The last thing to do now is to go and add the functions for the settings values. So we'll go back to our code, and we're still in that tutorial settings view presenter. So now we're just going to add some functions to handle the full screen. If that's simple enough, we'll create a private void called set full screen. Take a boolean, and this is simply screen dot full screen equals enabled. So to action this with a toggle, we'll get the toggle itself, and with that we can then call full screen toggle. So we're going to call register callback with a mouse up event, into here we can pass in the event, and then call set full screen and get the actual value of the toggle. And pass it in. And the last thing we need for this, oh actually, can I just do that? The last thing for this is it's worth just adding trickle down, dot trickle down. And that's now our full screen toggle setup. And the last thing that I want to show you for this video is how to populate that drop down. So the first thing that you're going to want is a list that will hold all of the values for that drop down. So I'm just going to add that to the top of this class now. So as you can see, I've just created this list called resolutions and populated it with a few common resolutions that people might use. Now, having set that up, what we want to do is grab our drop down. So we'll go back into our constructor. We'll create a private field. Now that I've got my drop down field, what we want to do is first add the choices that we have. So we just call dot choices, and we can set that equal to the list that we've just created. Simple as that. And now if you were to open that drop down, you would see this list of strings being displayed there. Next, we're going to do resolution selection dot register value change callback. So then anytime that value has changed, you're going to call a function, and I'm just going to set this to something called to a new method, which I will call set resolution. And I'm going to pass into there the value dot new value. So this value here is actually a change event, which will give you both the new value and the old value. So this can be useful if you need to know what the old value is before you go to the new one. And now I'm just going to use IntelliSense to generate that method for me. This is going to be new resolution. And then the last thing that we want to do here is set the index. To be 0. Now this will trigger this register value callback, so you might want to put this on the other side if you don't want to immediately set the resolution to whatever is at index 0. And the last thing is I'm just going to populate this with a method to actually change the resolution of my game. Okay, and now that I've finished that, as you can see, I'm just splitting the strings, turning them into integers, and then assigning them to the screen.setResolution, and the final boolean of full screen being set dependent on the full screen toggle. Now if we just jump back into Unity one more time, and now if I go into the settings and look at the resolution, you can see that it is populated with 3840 by 2160, and if I do the drop down, you can see we're populated with all the drop downs that we have set up previous to this. Obviously this won't work well in the editor, but if we do an actual build, then we'll see this functioning. Thank you for watching my second video on Unity's UI Toolkit. I hope this has been useful. Like I said in my last video, if there's anything else that you'd like to see me cover, then please leave a comment down below, and I will cover that sometime towards the end of this series. In the next tutorial, I will be covering how to create a custom control, which we will be using in the settings menu to toggle the full screen. Instead of using this toggle here, we're going to create our own. Okay, thanks very much. Bye.